Good morning. My name is Szapszewicz. I am a Holocaust survivor, a docent, a speaker at the Holocaust Museum Learning Center. I'm a poet and a writer. I wrote a book and I recorded a CD. It was actually recorded by the St. Louis Symphony a few years ago, and I would like for you to look at it. And if you want to buy it, the book, the Holocaust Museum profits from the book, and the CD, they get a profit, but not all. And I would like for you to pass around this. It's a great honor to speak to you, but remember, it's your privilege to listen to a survivor, because we survivors are dying out. And remember that you are the last generation which is listening to a survivor. I was a young girl when the war broke out. I lived in Poland, in a very large city, Lodz, where about 300,000 Jews lived. In Poland lived 3.5 million Jews. It was a vibrant, pulsing Jewish community. We Jews had our own language called Yiddish. We had very famous writers, poets. We had scientists, doctors, artists, painters, actors. It was a cultured and civilized society. In spite of everything, the Jews were hated. They were so discriminated in Poland. As a matter of fact, the Jewish children could not attend Christian high schools. But Jewish children were not deprived of education. We, Jews, believe in education. We have a special drive and zest to be educated. As a matter of fact, this is our weapon and our survival. We Jews gave the world the most important people, and those people made a huge difference in the world, like Moses, Jesus Christ, Marx. As you know, the Jews are a very, very small minority, 0.1% of the world population. But just think what they contributed to civilization in the culture of the world. 20% of the Nobel Prize winners are Jews. The war broke out in Poland the 1st of September 1939. I was a young girl. I lived with my parents. I had 2 brothers, loving parents. They gave me warmth and love. I had so many friends. My parents believed very much in education. We were 3 children. We all 3 attended private schools. I was growing up in a world of beauty. I thought the world is beautiful. It's the best place to live. I was a very happy child. As the war broke out the 1st of September 1939, the Germans conquered Poland in no time. They came to our city. They put up posters that we Jews have to wear yellow stars in front and the back of our clothes. They restricted our food to almost 1,200 calories, time when we can go in and out. We had our temples, we had synagogues, we had libraries, we had a small symphony, we had theaters. They burned books, they burned our temples and synagogues, they closed the school. Life was very miserable because we were hungry all the time. And they took us to unnecessary work. We had to clean toilets, scrub the pavements with toothbrushes. Behind us were Germans with pointed guns. Our supervisors were a young boy. In my city lived about 100,000 ethnic Germans. And as Poland was conquered by the Germans, they became full-fledged Germans. They served in the army, they were policemen, they were guards in the ghetto, and they made our life very miserable. And their children were supervisors. They were 12, 13 years old. They belonged to an organization called Hitlerjugend. They were military-minded. They were beating, kicking all the people. We thought, well, it's so bad, it's so bad. We really didn't realize that it was so good to be with our parents and to sleep in our own bed. And this changed. Poland, before the war, it was not a developed country. A lot of people were out of work. There was a section in our city, like downtown, which was so deteriorated. The people lived in one room, the water was outside, toilet was outside, and they had so many children. Those children were running around half naked, hungry, crying. They were sick with running noses. This part of the city, the Germans fenced in, put up guards every 30, 40 yards. And one morning we had dogs barking, Germans shouting out so and so, and in the churches were the bells ringing so loud, they chased us out. And they started to yell, you so and so, 4 columns of 5, and they started to chase us. We had to run. Whoever couldn't get out, they were beating and killing the people. We had to run. The Germans were on bikes with huge dogs, and they let the dogs loose, and they were biting the people. We arrived in the ghetto. We were assigned 7, 8 people to one room. There were some people who were privileged because they collaborated with the Germans, so they lived 2 or 3 people in one room. In charge of the ghetto was a man, his name was Chaim Rumkowski. Well, he thought if he would put to work every Jew, maybe he will have a chance to survive. And he thought if he would run this ghetto like a little government, there would be order. So we had our own police, militia, officers with workers. We didn't have any transportation. We didn't have cars, trucks, or horses. Everything was done by hand. We had grocery stores because we had some food stamps. And he thought, well, he's going to put everybody to work. And people wanted to work because it was like a reward. We got an extra slice of bread at work. So everybody tried to work. But children, they were 14 years old. They couldn't work, but they were hungry. So our parents lied about our ages. Oh, she's 60, she is strong, she can work. So we children worked in small ammunition factories, sewing factories. We were so hungry. We were starved and so thirsty all the time. Some girls said, let's drink water, girls, let's drink water, this will help. We started to drink the water. We had swollen legs, huge stomach, and we had to run every minute to the toilet. Life was miserable, but sometimes some girls came to work and said, oh, you know what? My dad told me the war will be over in a few days. We were children, so we were singing, we were dancing. 95% of those children did not survive. They died from starvation, from all kinds of diseases, or they were sent to death. I was privileged. My father was a successful businessman, and it happened that he imported and exported some machines which were made from iron. He had a special permission to deliver our goods to the Germans, because the Germans made weapons out of iron, and some workers, they were still Christian, they worked and helped him to deliver our goods. And one day, one Christian came up to my father and said, I have to save your wife and the children. I don't know what they want from you. Well, he smuggled us out of the ghetto. His neighbor was an ethnic German, and it happened that he was a guard in the ghetto. My father was left behind. My father was killed in the ghetto, and we traveled by horse and carriage. Only at night we were afraid. We had those yellow stars. Jews were not afraid to travel by train. And besides, the Germans put up posters. If you turn in a Jew, you get a kilogram of sugar. Or if you turn in a Jew, you get in 10 zlotys. The discrimination was unbelievable. They hated Jews. But there were some people, good people, who would help. We traveled, we arrived in this little town. It was a shtetl. And I'm sure you don't know what a shtetl is. A shtetl is a settlement of Jews. They had to form those settlements because they were not allowed to live in large cities before the First World War. Life was very poor in those little towns. The Jews were very, very poor. They didn't have jobs, but they were religious. They were very good people. My grandparents used to live in a shtetl like this. And since the larger ghetto was the first ghetto in Poland, we thought, well, maybe they won't form a ghetto. But they didn't have to, because only Jews lived. And the Christians had to move out when we arrived. My uncles were there, because they were afraid that in Warsaw they would make a ghetto. They accepted us, and we lived 3 families in 3 rooms. Life in the shtetl was so miserable, because there were about 6,000 Jews, but they put in others who lived close by, and swelled to 12,000 Jews. Nobody wanted to accept them because everybody lived with other people. They were dying on the streets. Broke out a terrible epidemic of typhus, other diseases. The Christian doctors left the town. They were not allowed to treat Jews. My uncles, they were doctors. They tried to help, but they were not allowed to prescribe any medication. What was their help? Well, try to keep clean, pray. The war cannot last forever. And who would think that the war will last 5 long years? And we still had it better than others, because the Christian who did not have a doctor and they lived on the outskirts of the city at night, they came to be treated by my uncles. They brought bread. It didn't take long. One night we had dog barkings, bells ringing, Germans shouting, calling us all kinds of names. Out, you so-and-so. And we'll think, what are they going to do with us? We are in the ghetto. We heard those rumors that they are gassing and burning people, but we thought, well, it's impossible. Just people make up stories. They chased us out of our apartments, and they yelled, you so-and-so, form columns of 5. It was such a noise. Children were crying, children got lost, families separated. In front of every column was standing a German. He took out a horsewhip From the boat, you left, you right, left. It was going on 7, 8 hours without food, without water, without a toilet. It was just impossible. I found myself among some young people, and I heard they are talking, well, they are going to send us to work, they are going to send us to work. I started to cry, and I thought, well, I don't see my mom, I don't see my brothers. I knew my father was killed. Maybe I should change, maybe I should get over to the other side. I don't want to live by myself. But what happened? All of a sudden I felt somebody pulled my skirt. I looked, my 2 brothers, we started to cry. And my brother said, where's Mom? Oh, he said, she's too old. They won't take her to work. She's about 36 years old. She's too old. But my older brothers yelled at us, you both better look for her. She looks like a 20-something-year-old girl. We started to look. We found her. We cried that we are together. They put us on trucks. We traveled about 6, 7 hours. We arrived in a town called Szapszewicz, where was a huge ammunition factory called Hermann Göring's Werke, and we tried to get off the tracks. Some girls asked, and where are we going to live now? Because we had to get to work in a few days. They took them away. We heard shooting, or they were beating them. We were with my mom, and she said, children, don't ask because they will beat you. So we didn't ask. But she started to cry. And she said, what I'm going to do with you? 3 children, what I'm going to do with you? We cried. We were hungry. We were thirsty. All of a sudden she said, you know what? I have a relative here. And she told us the name. We looked. She said, children, we don't have any transportation. People were out because 6, 7, 8 people in one room. They didn't want to stay home. They went out to get some fresh air. She said, ask. And we started to ask and ask the name. All of a sudden one guy said, oh, I know him. Will take us to him. My mom knocked at the door. The man opened up the door and was standing in line. What do you want? And she started, you might this, and cousin, you might this, might this. He said, all of a sudden I have 1,000 cousins, slammed the door in her face. We didn't have where to go. We were sitting on the steps, crying and bothering my mom. All of a sudden he opened up the door and said, you, with those children, get in, but you won't find a space. He was right. But other people worked already. We took their spaces. We quarreled, we fought, because when they came back, we didn't want to give them back the space. The same happened to this little town. Early morning, dog barkings, young men shouting, bells ringing, out, out. And this little town was surrounded by Germans. Outskirts were waiting cattle cars. But we heard over loudspeakers, those who worked in the factory on this side. The others, they put in the cattle cars, send them to death. Us, they took to a camp which was located on a hill. They searched us if we had some gold. We didn't have nothing. And then they put about 300 girls in one barrack. They separated us from the men. Everybody had a very small bunk bed. We didn't have any pillows, no blanket, just a straw sack. It was so cold. It was so miserable because we didn't have any covers. Every day they woke us up at 4. We had to be in the factory about 8 o'clock. We had a black leader and a couple. those people collaborated with the Germans. They start to count. The numbers never matched because during the night, quite a few girls died. Some were sick, some were weak. Until the time came to get to work, they start to chase us. We had to run. Some girls left their shoes on the way. Some were killed. We arrived in the factory, which was a huge, huge ammunition factory. About 20,000 Christians worked in that factory. Everybody was assigned to a special department. I was assigned to clean huge bullets for machine guns. I didn't know how to work. I couldn't even lift those bullets. But next to me worked a young man, a Christian, and he said, "Don't worry." And I thought, well, don't worry, yes, don't worry, who's going to do it for me? He was the most righteous man I ever met in my life. We were watched by guards, but they were lazy, they were reading papers. And I was so happy that I could communicate with him. He showed me how to work. Sometimes he worked for me. He brought me food. Food was so precious. And I remember one day I came to work, but I cried, and he looked at me. He said, "What happened? Why did you cry? Probably your mom died." I said, "No, she didn't." "So why?" And the only thing what I took from home was a coat, and this coat was my most precious possession, because I wore the coat, I covered myself with the coat and another girl. But the night in the morning when I came, he noticed that I cried, so I told him why. I said, "Look at my coat. My coat is completely torn. When I woke up, the coat was torn because we were pulling back and forth the coat to cover ourselves. The coat didn't cover us." He said, "Stop crying. I'll bring a needle and thread." And I thought, well, so he won't bring me the slice of bread. Next day he brought a little package, but he said, "I'm going to look out for the guard." And then he said, "Open up." There was a needle and thread, and another package next to it. And he said, "Sew up your coat when you'll be back in the bar." I started to cry. And I said, "I don't know how to sew." He said, "You will learn," which I learned first. Then I opened up the second package. There was an egg. I haven't seen an egg for a few years. I couldn't believe my eyes, and I said, "Is this for me?" He said, "Yes, but eat it first." But I put it in my pocket. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "You know, my mom is so hungry. I would like to save it for her." He said, "No, you have to eat." I ate the egg. I felt so guilty. And when I came back from work, they were giving out our portions. So I said, "Mom, you may have my bread." She said, "Well, why don't you want to eat?" I said, "I'm not hungry." She said, "What?" Oh, she started. You are sick, because it was a terrible epidemic of typhus. People had fever. We had so many lice. She said, "My God, you are sick, you are sick." I said, "I'm not sick." I didn't even want to admit to my mom that I ate the egg, even I couldn't save it for her. Life was so miserable. And the Germans, they had all kinds of methods of killing us. Every day after work, they gathered us in a huge square where they're hanging people, killing people. Then came a warning, you you have to work. If you won't work, the same happened to you. Then they took us back to the barracks. And they had all kinds of methods of killing. In small settlements, slave labor camps, 50, 60 people got sick. But they had a special battalion of Germans called Einsatzgruppen. They came to the camp, and those Germans volunteered for it. We had to dig ditches. Behind us were the Germans. When the ditches were deep enough, they killed the people, and they fell in those ditches. Others had to bury them. One night, we heard all night shooting. We didn't know what it is. We thought they are going to kill us. What happened? In the factory, there were all kinds of people. There were some Christians who belonged to the underground organizations, and they were very sympathetic to the Jews, and they tried to help them. In the meantime, the Russian army was advancing. It was very close to the camp. So they organized the young people to escape from the camp. They brought in some pliers to cut the wires, some axes, and those young people tried to escape, but they gunned them down. In the morning, they chased us out of our bark, beating us, yelling. They took us to this field. We had to watch the dying people for hours. Some were begging for water. Some were bleeding. It was just unbelievable. And they came a warning. You so-and-so. They called us horrible names. You think you escape. There's no way. That is going to be your escape. They took us back to the barracks. But they lied, a few escaped, and one of them was my late husband. He was running like other boys. He fell, some fell over him. During the night, he escaped to the woods. They had a farm about 30 miles from this camp. He knew the farm was confiscated, and he thought maybe the neighbors will help him. He walked during the night, couldn't walk even during the daytime. Our clothes was marked with red stripes in front and the back. After a few days, when he arrived in the village where they had the huge farm, he asked for help. They yelled at him. They said, "Get lost, otherwise we'll call the police." It really was a beautiful farm, a huge lake, a flower mill, some meadows, some orchard, and they had a nice big home. It was confiscated, but he thought maybe they will help him if he will promise them that they will inherit everything. Well, they started to yell at him. He went from one neighbor to the other, the same story. He didn't know what to do. He went back to the camp. When he arrived, the camp was empty. They sent us to Auschwitz. He was sitting crying. He was starved. What next? He didn't want to turn himself in to the Germans because they would kill him. He went back to another village. Somebody recognized him and started, you still alive, get out of here, get out. And he said, "Look, you've been my father's best friend. You play cards with him. You ate so many dinners in our home." He said, "That was before the war. Get out, I don't want to talk to you." His wife showed up. She pushed him away and she said, "Let me talk to him." And she said, if you do whatever I tell you, we'll hide you. We will dig a ditch in our farm, in our barn. We'll cover you with straw. You cannot get out. Only when I will tell you, at night, you will go to your flour mill. Bring us flour, so we can exchange for other groceries. He looked at her, and he said, "All right, you'll be surprised what people will do to save their lives." He was 9 months in that foxhole. He was liberated by the Russians the 24th of January 1945 when he got out. He lost his eyesight. He was so miserable. He was crying. And what I'm going to do now, he knew nobody survived from his family. But after a few days, he gained back the eyesight. It was 9 months, completely darkness. As they sent to Auschwitz, they put us in a cattle car. So many girls were packed like sardines. It was so dark. A few cracks on top of the car. Girls were crying, some were dying, some beating each other, some were laughing from bewilderment. And the Germans locked those cattle cars, the doors. They were throwing bread. Whoever was tall got the bread. Who was short couldn't get any bread. They put up a bucket with water. We were so thirsty, we tried to get to the bucket. We turned over the bucket. This was going on 5 days and nights. The distance from our camp was only maybe 55 or 60 miles. On every little station, train station, we had to wait 7, 8, 9 hours till the German soldiers who passed by. They were fighting the Russians. We arrived in Auschwitz on the ramp. There were waiting Germans with horse whips. They opened up those cattle cars and they stepped back. The order was unbelievable. And started to yell, "You so-and-so, take out the dead, put them in a row." We hardly could walk. And then you form columns of 5. On the way, 35% of the girls died. When we formed the columns of 5, the Germans looked at each girl, some. They took away. They marched us to Auschwitz. When we arrived, Auschwitz was a complex of camps. It was Birkenau, and this was the death camp. In Birkenau, the Germans had 4 gas chambers and 4 crematoriums. When we arrived, we seen a huge gate with the inscription, "Arbeit macht frei," to work, you'll be liberated. An orchestra was playing beautiful music. We thought, where are we? We were so confused. But the odor from the burnt flesh hit us. We start to choke. And they start to yell, "You, so-and-so, get in this bar. You, so-and-so, undress, naked, and the shoes, put away." When we got in the park, we see so many young men naked. Were always separated from the men. Some girls didn't want to dress, they took them away. I was with my mom, and she said to me, "Undress, put away the shoes. Don't look around, just look at me." And I put away my shoes. Since I'm a poet, I wrote a poem about the shoes, which I would like for you to hear. And this poem would describe what happened to the people. They left the shoes. Wherever you look, you see shoes, mountains, piles of shoes. Some of them were once squeaking. They were almost brand new. Some had holes and leaked. Some shoes were beautiful polished, and some were completely demolished. Shoes of almost all colors and shoes of all sizes. Narrow, wide, bright, light. tight shoes with high heels, shoes with low heels, shoes for display, shoes with nails, and some even had skate, and some were single without a mate. Shoes very fancy with beautiful bows. Some were so worn out, they were patched, and some didn't match. Some shoes had laces. There were even shoes with braces. Other shoes had beautiful good looks. There were men's shoes, women's shoes, children's shoes, and even baby shoes. The shoes were worn by people like you and me and others, to walk, to run, to kick. Some were for happy occasions, some for sad. And when I look at them, I became very angry. I start to cry. Those baby shoes, those poor baby shoes, in which babies try to take their first steps, in which they tried to learn to walk, and did take a few steps before falling into their mother's laps. Those fancy shoes worn by women who walked with such a grace. I can see each face, shoes and shoes and shoes. Where are all the people who wore those shoes? What a terrible shame is that there is nobody to claim those shoes. And we all know who is to blame. Yes, those shoes belong to our mothers, fathers, sisters and brothers, and to our children. What is left of those piles of shoes? I can talk. Their masters are dead. It's such a terrible tragedy, and it's so sad. As you know, 6 million Jews included, 1.5 million children. They were starved, tortured, murdered, gassed and burned. Other victims too, like gypsies. When they herded us in this barrack and we were waiting and waiting, they told us, we're going to get a shower. In our hearts, we know we're going to get gas because those were gas chambers. We cried, we prayed, and how those gas chambers looked. It was a huge bar with a large, very large metal door with little windows. We seen the entrance, we didn't see the exit. We seen people getting in, and nobody was getting out. On the roof, the Germans had fake chimneys. When they gassed the people, which was 95%, 99%, they put gas, and the gas came out through the showers. When they herded us in, we were packed like sardines, and I was thinking, well, how can I get even a drop of water? I started to cry. And I asked my mom a question, well, tell me, why? She got angry, and she said, I ask you the same question. Can you tell me why? We are innocent people. She said, pray. I started to pray. All of a sudden, water came out. We couldn't believe our eyes. But there are always some people who have something to say, so some girl said, well, you know what? It's 1944. The Germans are losing the war. They send young and old to the front. We are skilled workers. We worked in ammunition factories. They need us. Others said, well, you know what? Those gas chambers and crematoriums are working 24 hours. Maybe they got out of gas. Maybe they don't have gas until now. I really don't know why. And There were two oncoming cattle cars from all over Europe, Jews from France, Germany, Poland, Luxembourg, from everywhere. Well, they chased us out. We were naked, beating, kicking in another. They shaved our hair to the skin, put some kind of powder, chased us in another bark, and they start to yell, "You so-and-so, stay here." And some didn't know what they are saying, so they kicked them, they beat them, we were naked. It was a long table. On one side, there were sitting some people, I don't know if those were German, whoever they were. They had huge containers with ink, long needles, and they start to yell, "Put out your left arm," calling us names. And we did put out our left arms, and they put tattoos. It was so unbelievable. And some girls were crying. They took them away. I never seen them again. And my mom said to me, "Put out your arm. Don't cry, because you see what's going to happen to you." It hurt me so bad. So I didn't cry, but I was biting my lips to blood. Then they kicked us, chased us in another room. They were throwing clothes. Some girls got long dresses, some short dresses, and they gave us wooden shoes cut out from one piece of wood. They started, "You so-and-so, out." Form columns of 5. This was Birkenau. They didn't have any pavement. It was so wet and always so cold. Only mud. And they started to chase us. We were running. They were dogs. Some girls left the shoes in the mud. Some were running without shoes, some with one shoe. We arrived close to the bar. They were waiting. A black leader and a couple, they collaborated with the Germans. And they started to beat us for fun. And they started to yell, you see? It was a long board from wood in the bar. Here you're gonna eat, here you're gonna sleep, whatever you need. Outside is a kibble. This is your toilet. Outside you have water. In Auschwitz, the girls died from starvation because we did not have lice in Auschwitz. They took us to showers, but every time when they had to take us to showers, we cried and we prayed because we really didn't know what they're going to do with us. They took us completely to unnecessary work. We have to push back and forth lorries. One side unloaded, the other side loaded, and this was going on and on and on. And the food was in every camp in the ghetto the same amount. A slice of bread about 2 inches, a tin soup, and a warm liquid. As I mentioned, girls were dying from starvation. And one day, some Germans came in our bar. They started to yell, "Oh, you verfluchte, you out, out, out. You're gone to work." And we started to cry and to pray to God, work. We were skeletons. We didn't have any clothes. The clothes was torn, no underwear. They are going to gas us. But they took us to a train. We traveled quite a few days. We arrived in Germany in a camp called Bergen-Belsen. They didn't have gas chambers, they had a crematorium. This was the worst camp. They put us in a bark which was so deteriorated. It used to be a military camp, but the Germans who lived close by, they were stealing. They took off the shingles from the roof. they dismantled completely the bark. They took the wooden floors, they took out the windows, they took out the doors. We didn't have any bunk beds. We were so crowded that we had to sit cross-legged, and we supported each other back by back. In this camp, they had another method. They starved us to death. This small portion of food, what we're supposed to get, they didn't give us. 3-4 times a week. Girls were dying from starvation. We had so many lice. Our clothes was torn. In the beginning, the black leader forced us to take out the bodies. So 6-7 girls was dragging out a body. But later on, we couldn't even walk because we were crawling like animals. She decided not to bother us anymore. We lived with decaying bodies. We were so hungry that we chewed on wood. We were located in the woods. And you should look at those trees. The bark was completely taken off. We didn't have any grass because we ate the grass. We couldn't pull out the roots. It was so miserable. When I was liberated in Bergen-Belsen, this was the 15th of April, 1945, there were 15,000 skeletons unburied. I weighed at 56 pounds, my mom 47. I was liberated by the British Army. They tried to help us, but they didn't know how to treat us. They gave us the daily portion and milk. We were skeletons. And the girls started to drink the milk. You could see the stomach bulging out. They gave us their daily portion, which was like ham, biscuits, chocolate, some dry fruit, and the girls started to eat. 35% girls could live. They did not survive. The food was coming out. My mom wouldn't let me eat a little. She said I was so angry. I was crying. I was yelling, "You want to starve me?" But she was right. I was in a hospital for maybe 3-4 months. After 6 months, I was able to walk and to function. My mom was 7 years in a hospital, on and off. She was sent to Switzerland, and thanks to a very righteous Christian, he was a very old man. He was about 80 years old. And he said, "I'll do everything." He cried, "You will live because I'm going to bring you back to life." And he did. There were good people too, but not too many, because the world was indifferent. They let us die in vain. They did not hear our begging for mercy. They didn't want to hear crying our children. They were indifferent. What I want to tell you, we all are created the same way, regardless of our color of the skin, eyes, hair. We all are God's children. We all have to tolerate, accept, and respect each other. We cannot afford to be indifferent. We have always to stand up for justice. We can make a better world, because we, the people, make this world. So let's start to make a better world where people will live in peace and dignity. I can talk and talk. 5 years in ghettos, labor camp, concentration camps. It's very hard to tell you in 45 minutes or even in an hour. I'm glad you came. I would like to ask you, whatever you heard from me, tell others. Tell what happened. Maybe we can prevent tragedies like this, because this was the worst tragedy since human being exists. And don't you forget, it was not so long ago, it was 60-something years ago. People were so unhuman. They had so much hate. Even now, it's the same. They have hate, but nothing is to compare to the Holocaust. I'm very grateful to you that you came, and thank you very much. I'll answer questions if somebody has, but
when you were there in the concentration camps, did you see, were people angry at God? I mean, how did it affect their
yes,
faith?
they were.
Or did it bring them closer to God? How did you see people's faith?
well, most lost faith. But when came the last minute, all of a sudden they started to pray, because this was the only hope, God. Now, this answer your question?
Yeah. Did it strengthen your faith?
Yes. When they were dying, they prayed. Most of them. I seen it. Yes?
How long were you in Auschwitz?
Oh, about a half year. You couldn't not survive Auschwitz longer than 4 or 5 months.
What happened to your brothers?
Well, I was liberated the 15th of April 1945 in Bergen-Belsen. My brothers were in Mauthausen. My brother was killed the 20th of April 1945. The Germans gave him a little gas shot in his heart. I was already free. Yes?
You know, in the world now, in Western Sudan and Darfur, there's a lot of, there's genocide of the non-Arabs, and they're having to flee into Chad. And, you know, I wonder, you know, as Americans, you know, some Americans say that's not our part of the world, we shouldn't care, we should take care of our own problems. You know, what can students this age
they
do
should
about
care,
things
they should
that go
take
on
care
in the
of
world?
both. In United States and over there, but it's nothing to compare to the Holocaust.
That's right.
First of all, those people are free. They are not locked in ghettos. They can defend themselves and help themselves. It's very sad that this is happening. And I feel that we have to stand up for justice. We have to help them. But we don't.
What do you think that, you know, students this age can do to stand up for justice?
What I mean, if they see somebody suffering, they should stand up. You know, 50 million people perished during the Second World War. Why? Because they were indifferent. When Hitler conquered Czechoslovakia, they didn't do nothing. And when it came to them, it was too late. Hitler was a power already. They have to stand up for justice. And they have to treat each other with dignity, with respect and tolerance. Because every person is a whole world, according to my religion.
Thank you.
Because everybody can contribute something, and always does, in their own way.
Do you think Americans are becoming more indifferent, as the generations
I
go
cannot
on?
judge others,
Yeah, I know.
you know,
I know.
who I am to judge others.
Right.
But everybody, it should be their moral obligation to help others.
When did you come into the United States?
When I came in 1959, thank you again for coming.
Thank you so much.
Sure. I was told by the rabbi, he understood it, Stone. And I said, well, I think that's my number. No, I said. Then I called the Dawson, this was 10 years ago. Look, is this my number? She said, oh, it is. I think Joe Landing. It is your number, how do you have them? So I said, it was an inscription, an inmate who perished in Auschwitz. Her number was left. I went to the office and I said, Rabbi, I'm here. I survived. How do you get? And he told me he got some things from Washington, D.C., the museum, pictures, and I think I got this number.
Wow.
So I said, take off that I didn't survive. He said, bring your picture. I put the picture, but the picture was made 15 years after the war.
Yeah.
That's the start of my number.
Just roll up your sleeve and maybe put it on the table.
Yeah, just
Just put your arm on the table. And
right there.
What, I don't know what to do. Want to do like this?
so that the camera can see it.
Like this?
Well, we'll look at that in a minute.
No, I don't know what to.
Like this.
Or like that.
Yeah,
just like
perfect,
that.
just like that. It's just, it's so,
Right there.
and I know it's painful to go through this, Maria. I know it is. I mean, having it after the war, I'll probably want some of those too, so we can put some of those into the DVD of your story. So I'll come.
Oh, I was about 25 or 6.
Such a cute picture.
Well,
Yeah.
I was interviewed and I spoke at Yale University a few years ago, and they are building now a museum. And he's from his church. I don't know how he got him to do those things. Those pictures are after the war.
Right.
I don't have even. I was born in a very large city where about 300,000 Jews live, to very wonderful and loving parents. They care about us so much. My parents were learned people. In those times, there was a limit, because Jews mostly were learned in Torah, but not in secular education, but they did have. And happened that my father was a very successful businessman. We lived very, very good. We had a housekeeper, we had a laundress, we went to the best private schools, we had tutors, we took piano lessons, my brothers were playing the saxophone, piano. I didn't have a minute time, as I start in the morning until about 7 o'clock. At 8 o'clock we had to be in bed. And I was sneaking in a book. And my father was the first one who really introduced me to books. And I remember I was maybe in the first grade. He took me to a library. It used to be different than it's nowadays. You had to pay for getting books. And I remember He said to me, you see, those books, those are windows to the world. Cherish them. And I really always loved to read, because in our home there were a lot of books. My father was a very charitable person. He donated a lot and contributed a lot to the Jewish community in our city. My father always brought home, this was like some orchim. You know what the orch is? Some poor people for Shabbat, for the dinner. They couldn't afford to make a Shabbat meal, you know. He didn't live for himself. And my father let to write a Torah for a congregation which was located, I remember where, but I don't remember the name of the congregation. It was on Volchanska, and I remember this was shortly before the war. You know, when you donate a Torah, they make a big party. So I remember that we went with our housekeepers to this party because we had to leave early. It was the people were dancing, and at the door was standing a man who introduced whoever came, and he right away made up a little song with some chorus, you know, and oh, here comes Rabbi this and this. He's very rich, but he has a tight pocket, and he described everything. But then he was called a marshalik. He had like a long, a king had, I forgot the name of it, with a bow on top, and you know. And people were dancing, and then we had to go home because it was almost 8 o'clock, and we wanted to stay.
So you had good childhood memories.
Oh, wonderful. I had so many cousins, so many friends. I'm still in touch. Only 3 girls survive from our class. One lives in London. She's a very, very famous woman. She writes books. She's an artist, painter. She makes movies. She's very famous. She escaped from the ghetto and went to Russia and walked to Israel, to Syria, Turkey, for more than a year.
So that's wonderful.
And we're in touch, yes, every week. This in London. She has 2 homes in Israel, London, all over the world. She doesn't have so much time. But from time to time, she writes or talks. If not to me, she talks to my friend in Florida, and she tells me, you know, but this in Florida, we talk every week. It's like a chain. It's my past.
That's not,
and
well,
nobody knows about us.
When did you notice that things started changing?
What?
When did things start changing for you?
When the war broke out.
Well, but before, had you heard, what was your age? Growing up,
I was about 14 and a half years when the war broke out. And I thought life is, as I said, beautiful. I was surrounded by love and good things. My parents took us to the symphony, took us to music. My mom was ice skating with us. This, you know, I had a wonderful life. I went to theaters, to symphony, and I seen shows, original like Taive de Meltike. It was not a musical. It was a play, and I seen with the most famous actors. Like, I don't know if you heard about Ida Kaminska. You heard about her? She won an Oscar. She was in a movie, The Main Street.
So were your brothers older than you?
One was younger and one was older. Well, I don't have the pictures. I don't have any pictures from before the war. I have only pictures after the war. Nothing, everything.
Did you ever go back to your home? Was your home in
Well,
London?
in 1949, you know, I was liberated in Bergen-Belsen. After I recovered, I organized a Jewish community with a man, his name was Rosenberg. And this grew to a little town. In Bergen-Belsen, there were about 30,000 Jews. We had schools, we had a theater, we had a symphony, people were riding, we had schools, we had a theater. And then I worked for I had a few jobs. I worked for the United Relief Organization, which is like a branch of United Nations. For a woman, her name was Steele. I knew a little bit English. Then I worked, my main job was the Jewish community. There are so many people coming from all over Germany, from Poland, looking for relatives. And we looked up to the Red Cross, and we tried to put their lives together to help them. But one day after 3 or 4 years, 3.5 years, I said, well, I help others. Why don't I go back to Poland and see maybe somebody from my cousins or my relatives live? I went back to Poland, to the city where I lived. What I found out, nobody survived, but they wouldn't let me out. So I went to school, I graduated high school, I graduated college, I married, I had 2 wonderful daughters, and I had the most wonderful husband. He was much older than I am, because that time he was a lawyer, you know. And one day I decided, my one brother survived and lived here in the United States, and I decided to visit him. But there was no way out. We tried to get out of Poland to go to Israel, but every time we were not accepted because we are learned, we are this, they wouldn't let us out. So I said, you know what? My mom was in a resort, it was a hospital. She was still sick, and I wanted to visit her, and I couldn't, because whenever I applied for a passport, once they called me. My husband told me not to do it. They accused me of all kinds of things, that I am spying, because sometimes I throw in a few French words, sometimes German. She said, you are international. That's true. And they kept me, and they asked me all kinds of questions for hours. In the meantime, when I came back, my children were crying, my husband. I told you not to do it. And again, a few months later, they called me. It was like FBI came after me. They started this and this and this. Why I write in a few languages? Why can't I help them? I said, what to help? I'm not a spy. I just... And it was a woman that happened, that she was a Jewish woman who asked me all the questions. And I knew that she is Jewish, so I started to yell at her. I was so fed up with my life that I started to yell at her. What do you want? I said. I'm a concentration camp survivor. I am not a spy. What is in your head? And I yelled at her. And she said like this, and if you let you out, would you do something for us? I said, what? What? She said, help us. What? It didn't occur to me that you want me to be a spy or something like this. I said, no, no. And then she said, okay, you go home. And then she called me, and I got a passport to visit my brother.
Where was your brother?
But I had to sign a paper that if I won't come back, I will never claim my husband or my children.
And where were they at this point?
What?
Where were they at this point? At this time, your husband and your daughters.
Oh, we were living in Poland.
Okay.
And my husband, when I brought this paper that he has to sign, that he won't claim me, he said, I'm not signing, are you crazy? I said, no, I'm not crazy. I said, this is the only way to get out.
Right.
And he said, no. It took me a long time to convince him.
And so when did you get out?
In 1959, I came to this country. I graduated designing in Poland. After I lived with my brother, and after maybe 6 weeks, I said, I want to get a job. I don't want to be home. It was a terrible tragedy. But I didn't know how to drive because in Poland people didn't have too many cars. So, and I read in the paper that there was a store, Klein's. It's a very exclusive store. I said, I'd like to work in this store. He said, you're crazy. They won't hire you. I said, please take me, because he had a car. He said, no. And I cried and I begged him. I said, if you won't take me, I'll take the bus. So he took me. They accepted me. And I worked in the beginning maybe for 2-3 months as a seamstress. Then I was the manager of the alteration department and a fashion advisor. I worked so hard that nobody, my husband too, because I'll tell you about him too. I worked 18 hours a day. I was throwing over the clothes what I designed for the bushes, for the maize. Because I worked regular at Klein's, and they sold this to Franklin Simon. And I worked at home. I was a mother, a housekeeper. I did everything. My children were crying. In Poland, we had a piano. Here, we don't have a piano. In Poland, we had this. So we tried to give them. And my husband, I brought them over 9 months later. It was a law that you cannot bring your family. But then they changed the law. And Symington was the senator, and I applied to become a citizen for, how do you call this? I forgot. And he granted me, and I took them, I brought them over. My husband was very unhappy because in Poland, he was a lawyer, he was teaching at the university. He complained day and night, and I was miserable. But we should never get out of Poland. I was somebody. Here, I work in the transportation, and I make $1 an hour. So one day he said, you know what, I decided to go back to school. So he worked during the daytime, and in the evening he went to Washington U. And he graduated Washington U with a master's degree in business administration, summa cum laude. At night he was studying. He worked for the government, for the American Army. He was very successful. If you would come to my place, you will see his achievements, his awards. He made a lot of.
But I want to go back, Maria, actually, because I want to go over some of the stuff you told the kids, okay? So you started with the fact that things changed in 1939. So tell me exactly when you got put into the ghetto. Tell me about that experience.
Exactly the day they put us in the ghetto, April 1940. Conditions were bad all the time, restricted, you couldn't get food. And I told the children what happened in the ghetto. They burned the synagogues.
Tell me you personally, from you.
From my point.
I want you to say what you experienced.
Well, I lived with my parents, and life was very miserable, but we still had a little bit better than others because our housekeeper somewhere she smuggled in food for us. It was a tragedy for her that she cannot be with us. And I had friends. I didn't see them, but whenever I could, I went to their homes to see them. We didn't have nothing. Later on, they opened up the schools. And we were starved, sitting, being so hungry. And then we had to work because we wanted extra slice of bread. So our parents lied about our age, that we are older.
So what did your father tell you? At that time, what were his thoughts about why you were there and what they were doing to the Jews? You were a young girl, you were 14. What were your discussions about?
I don't understand your question.
You've been taken from your home, you've been put into the ghetto.
Yes, with my parents.
Right,
we
with your
lived together.
parents, but
In a room about 8 in another
right.
family.
So were you frightened? Did you talk to your dad about being frightened?
Well, listen, this is not true that I was frightened. I didn't have to tell him, oh, Dad, I'm scared. He's seen it, that I'm scared. I'm miserable. I couldn't get out whenever I want to. I didn't have to talk to him. He was himself miserable that he couldn't provide for us and give us whatever we needed.
And what did you think the future, what did you think was going to happen?
What's going to happen? That we will die from starvation. That's what happened to about 600,000 Jews. But we were lucky because my father was a very successful businessman, and a lot of people worked for him. And as I mentioned before, he imported and exported machines. And machines were made from iron. The Germans need iron to make weapons. So one day they beat up my father and we were crying. They took him, the SS. We thought he would never come back, but after a few hours he came back. They were beating him, demanding where he has the gold, his account in Switzerland, this and this. And then he told us that he will be able to get out of the ghetto under guards to deliver our goods. And the people who work for him will help him to deliver. And one day, this man who was in charge of the other workers came up and said, I have to save the children and your wife. And I told the story. Shall I talk about it? He smuggled us out of the ghetto. His neighbor was ethnic German, who was a guard. No.
So when you got smuggled out of the ghetto, it's you and your mom and your brothers.
Yes, my father was left behind. They killed my father when...
When did you find out, though, that your father had died?
There was still communication. People left the ghetto. They were smuggled out. And sometimes we could write to a Christian from this little town, you know. And he found out there was some connections, not good connections, but some. But we thought maybe it's not true, you know. People have always hope. Maybe he was not killed. Maybe he is somewhere, you know.
So do you think that hope was something that kept you going throughout the...
Yes, hope. In my heart, I felt that I have to survive, and I will survive. I don't know.
How do you think you had that?
Well, this is something that comes natural. I cannot make it up. Some people have it and some don't have this kind of spirit, you know? And I always thought I will survive, and someday, I'll talk about or write about that, because I was a pretty good writer in school too, you know? And I was writing after the war in a Polish paper called, in Polish, Przyjaciółka. It was a magazine, but I didn't write about the Holocaust. I was scared to death. I write about designing, patterns, how to make, and so and so.
So after you go out of the ghetto, you went to the shtetl,
Yeah.
and it was just a question from that point on, like you said, of surviving. Of
Yes,
doing what you
yes,
had to
yes.
do.
Well, it happened that my uncles, my family was very educated. My grandpa, he believed in education. That time he was a liberal. To be honest, he didn't believe in God. I remember he was a wealthy man because they had a brewery, they had like a inn, you know, and others were looking up to them. So he sent out his children. My uncle graduated Sorbonne before the war. The other uncle went to Liège, Belgium. He was an engineer. And the youngest one went Poland to Warsaw, to the university. In Poland they had Jus numerus nullus, which means 0 Jews. But he went to, they were beating him, the student, and he said, I am going to stick it out. The war broke out, he graduated, but he had to be a resident. You know, Poland was the same in the hospital, but he didn't get to be, he was killed by the Poles. He escaped from the camp to the woods. There was an underground organization called Armia Krajowa, and he had boots. You know what? I did tell you about that escape. And he survived with another guy, and they walked to the woods, and they seen Polish partisans. They would like to join them, but they were very anti-Semitic. And when they seen them, they said, you Jew, take off the boots. So the other guy told us, he survived. He took off the boots and gave them. And my uncle said, no, I cannot expect from you. You are citizens of this country. I am too. I'm not going to take off the boots. They killed him. He said, I told him, take off the boots. He said, without boots, without shoes, I'm dead. He said, I'm not going to do it.
And who told you this story? How did you hear this story?
Well, this man
Who was with
came
you?
to Bergen-Belsen,
Okay.
and he looked us up, and he told us this story. And the same about my brother. How would I know?
Right.
You don't know what was going on when I worked in the Jewish committee. It was crowds and crowds coming to find out if somebody. They were wandering from one town to the other, the survivors, terrible conditions. There were no trains. This was after the war. They were walking. They were, how do you say, hijacking, yes. And they came. Look up, maybe. I seen scenes what nobody's seen. I heard such a noise, so I went out of the office. A man found his sister. She came to look for him, and he came to look for her, and they kissed and they yelled. And those are true stories. It's not just made up.
Right. When they had taken you to the right and the left, and you were with your brothers, and your mother wasn't there, tell me about that, about finding your mother.
Well, when they took me, and you know, I was always sheltered by my parents. And those people were more rough, you know. They said, oh, we're going to work. And I started to cry. I didn't see my mom. I didn't see my 2 brothers. I knew my father was killed. And I cried. I said, well, I should go on the other side. Whatever will happen to them will happen to me. But all of a sudden, somebody pulled my skirt. My brother recognized me, and I see them both, and we start to cry, and we start to kiss each other, which didn't happen often. And my younger brother said, and where's Mom? Oh, he said, they won't pick her. She's too old. My older brother said, how old is she? She's 36 years old. We always went ice skating and everybody asked, where's your mom? And we said, that's my mom. So she looks young, let's look for her. And we found her.
Okay. Tell me about the man who worked next to you that brought you food when you worked in the factory.
Well, he was a very righteous Christian. I found out that really religious people, and I believe in it, who really believe in the Ten Commandments and they believe in God, they are good people. They are good people. He was very religious. He belonged to underground organization, and he wanted to help me. He did help me. He made a big difference. He brought me food. You know, not much, but kept me alive, you know, because he didn't have too much either. The Christians didn't have so good either, but they didn't kill them, they didn't gas them, they didn't burn them. If they were against the Germans, they fought the Germans, yes, they killed them. I can tell you thousands of stories in my family what happened.
But he just worked alongside of you at the factory.
What?
He was a worker just like you in the factory.
Yes, he worked in the, but he belonged to an underground organization. He was very religious, very fine man. He didn't survive. The Germans killed him. Because after the war, when I went to Poland, I want to look up for him and for the men who smuggled us out. And when I looked, they told me that the Germans killed him, and I went. Actually, she was our housekeeper, and the man who worked for my father married her. So I went over there. I knew where they lived before the war, and she cried and she kissed me, and she said, no, he died. He had tuberculosis. No, I had tuberculosis too. When I want to come to this country, they wouldn't let me because they found that I have some spots on my lungs. And when I came home, I cried because I had little children. So my sister-in-law, she was a doctor too. Don't worry, she said, come with me to my doctor. And he looked and he said, well, it's healed, but I don't know. But I will send the x-rays to Paris, because in Poland the Americans did not have an embassy, because it was a communist country. Then came that, yes, I did have, but those spots are healed. So they let me out a lot. Most people who survived Bergen-Belsen, Auschwitz, had tuberculosis. My mom had tuberculosis all over her body.
Tell me, when you got liberated and your mother was sent to the hospital, tell me about that.
Well, in the beginning, you know, they didn't have hospitals, nothing. So we lived about 8 girls in one room. It used to be an officers' camp. The old camp, Bergen-Belsen, they burned because it was a terrible, terrible epidemic of typhus, lice, other diseases. The British burned the camp, and they took us over to another camp called Bergen-Belsen too, but was an officers' camp. The other one was for soldiers. And Hermann Goering had his headquarters in this camp. It was a beautiful palace. And there were, I wouldn't say barracks, maybe barracks, but, you know, we had water, we had food, because the British Army supplied us with food. We had a shower on the end of the hall. We were happy, even we lived 10 or 8 girls in, because most young girls, and my mom was with me, but she could not walk. And we didn't know what to do. So we had, in one bed, they were sleeping 3 girls. So what we did, she wanted to look out for my brothers. So we put her back to the window and support her with all kind of blankets because she couldn't hold day and night. And she looked. And sometimes she started, oh, it's Henry. It was not, you know, until one day he showed up. And she was sent to Switzerland, to a hospital, because, you know, Switzerland, in the mountains, they had special resorts for lung not cancer, tuberculosis. And she was on and off for 7 years. She lived in Switzerland 17 years and then came to this country to be with us.
So what was that like as a young girl? You're liberated. It takes you 6 months to get your health back. And then, like I said...
You didn't think about nothing, just, to fill your stomach. Right. You were completely out, but when you felt, you know, that I have enough food, then you start to think, and then you see what happened to you. And some survivors committed suicide in the camp. And I knew them, because the whole family, you know, was killed. They were left alone. They couldn't handle it. Well, my support was my mom and my brother, you know, and all depends. Some people are stronger inside, and some are not so strong.
You had to be naked, and your mother was there to help you through that.
Well, she was in Switzerland, but still the thought that I have her.
When you were in the camp, when you were in the camp, and they told you to take off your clothes and go into the shower.
We supported each other, you know, in a certain way. I was so sick. I had double pneumonia. I was so sick that nobody would even think that I would live. And she had a girlfriend, she was a doctor from Czechoslovakia. She said to her, she won't make it, that I won't make it. So don't cry, she said, because we won't make it. We won't make it too. So sooner or later, that was her, that we won't make it. So it's better sooner than later and to suffer. That's what. But I made it, and how I made it.
And your mother made it.
Yes, I made it thanks that I was a good human being, and I have to pat myself for it. I was so sick. I had shoes. How I had it, it's a long story, I can talk and talk. And I had a coat. It was torn, but it was a coat, you know. I was so sick, and I was good to this girl because we covered ourselves with my coat. And one day, this was in Bergen-Belsen, there were oncoming trains with Jews from Auschwitz, other concentration camps, and they brought, and from Germany too, not from camps, they still lived in Germany, and they brought suitcases with food, and they need people to sort this out. But she was half naked, and I had this coat, and I had the shoes. I had such high fever, I didn't know what's going on. Her name was Basha Greenspan, and she said to me, my name was Marci, Marci, may I have your coat? She was she is still alive, the most beautiful girl you ever seen in your life. What a beauty she was, but she was a skeleton too. She said, you know what, they chased out some people and they are looking for people to sort out this. May I have your shoes? I said, take whatever you want because I'm dying, which I was. She took my shoes, she took my coat. They picked her up, and she was sorting out clothes and food. And she gained a little bit weight after a while, and the assessment who was in charge fell in love. He just went for her, you know. And he brought her food and everything, and she smuggled in the food and fed me. I hardly could eat. She just pushed in the food in my mouth. Chew. But I helped her before, you know, and thanks to her I'm alive. And I seen her after the war. I had pictures at home. She married American because she went to Munich to Feldfinger, was a camp, a displaced camp, and the man, American, was in charge, and he fell in love, and she married him. She had 3 or 4 husbands. She's a very wealthy woman.
So you think that
It pays off to be human in the long run, and thanks to her.
and the fact that you and your mother had each other, do you think that helped you survive?
Yes, it helps, yes. It helps.
Did you feel like you had to live to take care of your mother?
I don't know if I realized this, but inside probably I thought, well, I have to live for her, and she thought she has to live for me, because we didn't know that one brother survived, you know?
And once she went to, let me go back. Wait, just I want to focus on the fact that she actually did help you with the tattoo, telling you not to cry.
Well, that's right. No, don't cry, she said, because they take away and they kill you. They send you to the gas chamber. So don't cry. So I didn't. I was biting my lips, but I didn't cry. Or I looked around, so many young boys. How can I take off naked? How can I take off my clothes? And she said, take off your clothes. Don't look around. Just look at me. You know?
So what if you hadn't had her there with you?
Well, who knows? I cannot predict what would happen. But I had a very strong will to live.
The time when you did eat the egg, at that time you felt guilty. Tell me about that.
I felt guilty because I had to eat. He forced me, you know, to eat the egg. I ate it, but it was sticking in my throat. When I came back from work in the barracks, they were giving out the bread. So I took the bread and I said, Mom, I'm not hungry. It was a terrible epidemic of typhus. People were dying. You cannot imagine begging for water and nobody had the strength to get the water for them. Well, it's hard to talk about it, you know. It's very hard because people think you talk, it doesn't hurt. The pain is there. It's a bleeding wound. It's very hard to talk for me.
When your mom went to Switzerland and you knew she was going to stay
They took her to Switzerland with the ambulance.
Did you go visit her, or were you stuck in Poland?
Well, I couldn't go visit her. It was after the war. It was like Germany was divided. You know, there were a British zone, was an American zone, a French zone, and a Russian zone. I went the first time, I think, 1946 to visit her, you know.
So was that hard? Was that hard for you to be separated after you'd gone through the war together?
Well, I found my brother, I mentioned, and I worked a lot, and my brother worked too, so we supported each other, and I had to, after work, to cook, and I didn't know how to cook. So this I remember. It was hard to get food, but we got some food from the Jewish Community Center. We were not paid by the Jewish community with money, because that time the Germany had the old money and then they exchanged, so they paid us with food, canned goods. And once my brother got some potatoes, so he said, you cook the potatoes, I'll come back from work. We have something to eat. So I put the potatoes in a pot, and I put this much water, and they burned. And he came out, and he said, it smells so. What happened to the potatoes? I said, I burned them. This happens a few times, and then he started to yell at me. Are you stupid or what? Don't you know that you have to cover the potatoes with water? I remember that.
Sure. When did you meet your husband?
I knew my husband a long time ago. As I mentioned, my grandparents lived in this shtetl, and many times for vacation my mom took us to visit her father. He was a friend to my uncle. They went to gymnasium together. He lived in a village, but this was a shtetl, so often he came to be with them, and he visited them often. When I was a little girl, I was about 6 years old. He was about 11 years older than I am. So he always was holding me on his knee. He always told me, you were heavy like lead. So I knew him a long time. I had another boyfriend. I can talk and talk and talk. In this book, I have his picture, but he died after the war. He had tuberculosis.
So when you were liberated, you were barely alive.
That's right.
Tell me about that.
When I was liberated, the British Army, they called in doctors. They put up a field hospital, and they didn't have enough beds, so they put blankets on the ground. They carried us out like babies. And then they start to feed us the way how we should be fed. They gave us jelly to drink because our stomachs were not prepared to eat regular food for quite a few days, then soup. But those British soldiers who liberated us, they didn't know. They brought in milk. They gave us meat to eat. And a lot of girls, about 30%, died. They could live if they will be fed the way. So and later, they start soup, they start to give us bread and this and this. And that's the way how it was. It's unbelievable, but it is true. I cannot describe.
Okay, so
It's beyond words what happened.
And which brings me to the point of you starting to talk, since it was beyond words. And
I started to talk. I had friends in Poland, and we talked about it, but not in public, because first the Poles were very anti-Semitic. When I went to college, I had to change my name to Maria. My name was not Maria. They were so anti-Semitic, the students, that you cannot even imagine. So once the dean called me in, what happened? Then later I found out that he converted to Christianity, but he was a Jew, He said, why do you have to go through what you went through? Change your name, he said to me, to Maria, because you have a Jewish name. I came home and I said to my husband, change the name. He said, no, don't. So next time he called me in, he said, I will help you to change the name. And I changed the name, and one day, I will never forget that. I learned from this man so much, and another man. We had to take the tramway. The tramways were packed because we didn't have, Poland was not a developed country, they didn't have too many buses. And it was a ride about 40 minutes. On the outskirts was the university. So on the way back, when I got in the train, I couldn't find a seat. I had to hold on to all of a sudden, I seen a little girl, maybe 7, 8 years old, ask her mom, "Mom, who is this man?" There was sitting a man, this was 1947, no, not 47, 50-something. And, you know, some Jews came from Israel to look for the families. He happened to be a rabbi. He wore a big black hat, a capote, a silk with white socks. And those children didn't, so she said, "Who is this man, Mom?" And she said, "That's a dirty Jew. Hitler didn't kill them all. They are still alive." So one man got up. He said, "Ma'am," he said, "you should be ashamed. There are people like us. They suffered so much. How do you teach your child?" And it started. Some people were pro, some were, "Well, she's right. They should kill them, those bloodsuckers," and this and this. And the man, the conductor, stopped the tramway. He said, "If you all won't stop fighting, we're not going nowhere." So they stopped for 5 minutes. And they started again. And then he said, and this man, the rabbi, was sitting, looking out through the window, like they wouldn't even mind him. But when his destination came, he got out like nothing happened. I learned from him so much. Would he say something, they would beat him up. This way. Next day I thought, well, there was a Jewish community on Zahodna 66. I said to him, it's not, when I came to my destination and I got out, another young girl, not woman, I don't, got out. Oh, she said, thank God, thank God. I looked at her and I said, "Are you Jewish?" She said, "Yes, but they permit her to go to Israel in 2 months." She said, "Thank God, I'm going to Israel." She said, "Are you Jewish?" We were in one class, we didn't even admit that we are Jews. I said, "Yes." I had to cross a park in order to get home. My husband waited for me, but it took another half hour because they were, before the tramway arrived. So he thought maybe I came home, maybe he didn't notice me. He went back home, and I had to cross this park. I was running like crazy. When I came, he said, "What happened?" I told him this story. That's how it was in Poland when I lived.
And that at that point is when you decided that you would start speaking?
Well, no, I spoke always, but I had some righteous Christian too, who saved Jews too, you know, and we are speaking about it. But I didn't speak in public. But when I came to this country, I did. And you know what? The Jews were ignorant. Once they noticed a number, and they said, "You were in prison." I didn't know what they mean. I said, "What do you mean I was in prison?" "Yes, you were. You have a number." They didn't know about that. Then I explained.
And what does that mean to you, that you still have that number on your arm?
What it means to me, it doesn't mean to me special. It has a meaning to others, what the Germans did. We didn't have any names, we were numbers. It's a proof that the Holocaust did happen, because there are so many people who denied it never happened. Even the Iranian president, such an ignorant person, such a hater.
When you come and talk to the kids, tell me what you want them to want. When they leave,
I want to make a better world. I want to prevent tragedies like this. I want to make a just world. I know, who knows when it will happen, but I just want to put grounds
so by
to
your,
know what happened.
So when
So
they,
people should act and stand up for others. That's why I'm talking.
so when these kids walk out of this museum, what do you want them thinking?
To stand up for justice. If somebody looks different, doesn't mean that he's a bad person. You know? It's the same. It's just the outside looks different, that we all are created the same way.
What does it do for you being able to be a speaker?
What does it mean to me? A lot, as I mentioned before. I try to help to make a just world. Not for my lifetime, maybe.
Is there any type of understanding, of rationalization of something? You had everything taken away from you. Your life was completely, ruined. You lost your father and your brother and all your grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins.
Well, I still have a pain in my heart. Nobody can take it. People don't understand. In order to understand the survivors who went through concentration camps, you have to be in their shoes. You have to see with your own eyes what happened. Now, but because some people say, oh, I understand, makes me angry. I said, no, you don't. You know? And also, there are a survivor and a survivor, there is a difference. A survivor of concentration camps and a survivor who came to this country with the parents, was sent to school, lived a normal life,
Sure. Is this
enjoyed life. It's a survivor too. It's very relative.
Is this why you've written your poems? Tell me about your poems.
I express myself in my poem. That's the way what happened. I write what happened to let the people know, to reach a larger audience, to reach people.
Okay, and tell me about your book.
Oh, my book? Well, I'm writing this book whenever I feel like. Poems. I'm writing another book, but it's not that I sit and write. Whenever it comes, I put it down on the paper.
So what do you see your legacy as being?
What?
Your legacy. What is it for you, for your family, for your ancestors? What do you see that you have done in your lifetime?
Well, I see that I try to contribute something, to tell people to be righteous. Because only by being fair and stand up for justice, we can make a better world, because there is enough bread for everybody. We don't have to kill each other. It doesn't come because there is not enough food for me. It comes from ignorance, from hate, you know? And that's the way how people are brought up, the children at home. They don't even know a Jew, but they heard.
So do you think that, I see the reaction you have with the children. What is that, tell me, when you're leaving after talking to them and they're thanking you?
Well, I feel that I achieved something, that those children will think twice before they will hurt somebody.
Okay.
And they will relate to others, and they will tell others. So this is for me a big, big achievement for myself, that I do it. Because, as you know, I'm not young, I'm an old woman. And anytime They will call me one person. I'll come and speak. I'll drag myself, even I don't feel good, and I will speak.
And you have. This has been, you have taken your story and you are constantly telling and
Yes,
spreading.
yes.
Is
And
this
I
a
want to
mission
do
for
it
you?
never too much, never. Do you know one day, Yom HaShoah, it was Yom HaShoah, I spoke to 3 groups and I was sick because I had terrible allergies and sinuses. My glands didn't develop. I didn't have enough minerals and vitamins, which was the diagnosis in Mayo Clinic. I was so sick. I went to Black Yeshiva, to Zumwalt, I think. This was maybe some 8 years ago. And then St. Francis, something, a church confirmation class came in the evening. I didn't go
That's okay.
to the Holocaust memorial service because I felt it's more important to talk to them, because those people who come to hear my testimony, more or less, they are Jews and they know about it.
We got one last minute. Is there anything else you want to tell me?
What?
We have one more minute. Is there anything else you want to tell me?
Well, I have a lot to tell you, but I don't remember everything offhand. You know, it's not like a click and comes out.